312 furious citizens, 41 explosive seconds. 7 searing questions that ripped through the walls of Congress. In one hearing, Jasmine Crockett cornered Barrymore on tariffs, abortion bans, and Trump's crooked tax cuts, every word he muttered drowned by screams of liar and shame. The chamber shook like a battlefield. The cameras caught his collapse, and the nation held its breath. But here's the question: when leaders crumble under fire, who pays the real price, you, your family, or America itself? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The cameras were already rolling when the door slammed shut. The sound echoed through the chamber like a warning shot. 312 citizens from Alabama packed every inch of the gallery, their faces carved in stone, eyes locked on the witness table where history was about to ignite. Some clutched handwritten signs under their coats, others whispered angrily into their phones, but most just sat in a tense, suffocating silence. They had waited years for this moment, and tonight, no politician would escape without answering. Barrymore entered with the swagger of a man who thought he was untouchable. He smiled, too wide, too polished, the kind of grin that belonged to campaign posters, but not to real life. He waved stiffly at the crowd as if they were props in his theater, then dropped into his seat with a confidence that felt rehearsed, almost forced. His aides hovered nervously behind him, shuffling papers, pretending everything was under control. Derry adjusted his tie, leaned back, and whispered to a colleague, "This will be easy." He had no idea how wrong he was. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett sat motionless, her posture straight as steel, her gaze cutting through more like a blade waiting to strike. She wasn't smiling, she wasn't pretending. In her hands were folders packed with evidence, numbers, and the questions Moore had spent his career dodging. Her presence was electric, like a storm cloud rolling in, silent but heavy, pressing down on the room until every breath felt harder to take. Moore was the actor on stage. Jasmine was the executioner waiting in the wings. The chairman's gavel hit the wood with a crack, and the room jolted alive. This hearing is now in session. Dozens of reporters leaned forward, pens scratching, cameras zooming in on the faces that would soon plaster headlines across the country. But the real drama wasn't on the dais, it was in the crowd. A farmer with calloused hands whispered, 41 seconds. "That's all it'll take," his neighbor nodded grimly. Everyone knew something was about to explode, they just didn't know when. Derry cleared his throat, his opening statement rehearsed down to the syllable. He spoke of values, of family, of America first, his words hollow, bouncing off the walls without landing anywhere real. For a brief moment, he almost believed himself, but then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw Jasmine watching him, calm, unflinching, eyes locked on every word like a predator timing its strike. He stuttered on a lie. The first crack in the mask, a murmur rippled through the audience. The air thickened, and then came the silence. Heavy, suffocating, unnatural. Cameras zoomed in, waiting, hungry. Jasmine leaned forward, tapping her folder once on the table, a sound like the first drop of rain before a storm. The crowd leaned with her. Barry froze, his forced grin flickering, his hand twitching against the microphone. The storm hadn't broken yet, but everyone in the chamber knew it was only seconds away. 41 seconds that would shake Washington forever. The first question came like a spark to dry kindling. Catherine Quigley, a middle-aged woman from Fairhope with a voice sharp enough to cut through the murmurs, stood up from the gallery. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't bother with pleasantries. She raised her hand, her words slicing through the silence. "Who pays the tariffs, Mr. Moore? Is it consumers or the exporting country?" The chamber froze, reporters, pens halted mid-scratch. All eyes swung to Barrymore, who leaned forward, fingers gripping the microphone as though it might save him. He forced a chuckle, that same plastered grin, and replied with practiced ease, "Well, we haven't seen inflation at all. If you look at the reports." Before he could finish, a wave of outrage surged from the crowd. "That wasn't the question," a man shouted. Others joined in, voices rising in unison, a storm of fury rattling the walls. "Answer her, who pays?" The sound was raw, guttural, filled with years of frustration boiling to the surface. Moore stammered, his rehearsed confidence splintering under the nose. He raised his hand to quiet them, his voice cracking. "It's the other country, the exporter." But he never finished. Laughter, harsh, bitter, ripped through the chamber, the kind of laughter that cuts deeper than any insult. And then Jasmine Crockett rose, slow, deliberate, every movement measured like the count before a lightning strike. She held the microphone in one hand, the folder of evidence in the other. Her voice, low at first, cut through the chaos with surgical precision. "No, Mr. Moore, stop lying to them." The room fell silent, even the hecklers froze, waiting. She stepped forward, her tone sharpening with every word. "To people pay, Mr. Moore, every mother at the grocery store paying higher prices. Every farmer watching costs rise while profits vanish. Every worker in Alabama struggling to keep food on the table, that's who pays." The camera zoomed in, Jasmine's eyes blazing, Moore shrinking back, Catherine's fists clenched with vindication. A mother in the back row wiped a tear, whispering, "Finally, someone said it." The energy shifted. The crowd was no longer a restless audience, it was an army, leaning forward, fueled by a single voice that refused to bend. Moore tried to interrupt, his voice trembling. That's not." Jasmine's palm smacked the folder shut, the crack echoing like a gunshot. She pointed directly at him. "Don't you dare insult these people's intelligence. You can lie to Washington, but you cannot lie to them anymore. They live it, they pay it, and tonight, you will answer for it." A thunder of applause erupted, mixed with chants of "Answer, answer, answer." The chairman's gavel pounded helplessly, but it was useless now. The chamber belonged to the people, and Jasmine had lit the match. Moore sat frozen, beads of sweat cutting lines down his temple, eyes darting desperately for rescue that would not come. In that moment, the hearing was no longer just politics, it was a battlefield. And Barry Moore, once so confident, looked like a man who had already lost. The storm had broken, and there was no escape. Barry Moore shifted in his seat, his hands trembling against the microphone. The sweat was visible now, glistening on his forehead under the harsh white lights of the chamber. He tried to force the smile again, but it cracked halfway, slipping into a grimace that betrayed the panic tightening in his chest. His voice had carried bravado minutes ago, but now it faltered, brittle, like glass on the edge of breaking. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett did not move quickly. She didn't need to. Her stillness was power, her silence more dangerous than Moore's words. Finally, she leaned forward, her voice steady and deliberate, slicing through the noise. "Today is not about politics. It's about truth." The sentence hit the chamber like a hammer. For 3 unbearable seconds, the room held its breath. No rustle, no whisper, just the sound of silence pressing down, heavy as stone. Moore blinked rapidly, his lips parting as if to respond, but no words came. He was cornered, a man drowning in front of hundreds, the cameras capturing every twitch, every drop of sweat, every second of his unraveling. And then, without warning, the dam burst. A single voice shouted from the gallery, sharp, furious, undeniable. "Shame." Another joined in, and another. Within moments, the chamber roared in unison, "Shame! Shame! Shame!" The wall seemed to tremble with the force of it. The sound wasn't protest anymore, it was judgment. A verdict delivered not by politicians, but by the very people Moore claimed to represent. Reporters scrambled to capture the chaos, lenses snapping, microphones thrust forward. The chairman's gavel pounded in vain, drowned out by the thunder of the crowd. Moore's eyes darted wildly, searching for escape, but every exit was blocked by the echo of condemnation. He mouthed something, maybe a plea, maybe an excuse, but no one listened, no one cared. Jasmine remained standing, her gaze locked on him, unwavering. She didn't shout, she didn't join the chant. She simply let the storm rage around her, her silence more commanding than any words. When the noise reached its peak, she raised her hand slightly, and like a conductor silencing an orchestra, the room began to quiet, breaths ragged, hearts pounding, but all eyes on her once more. Her voice was calm, but her words burned. "This is what happens when leaders lie. This is not anger, it's accountability. And accountability is what keeps democracy alive." The crowd murmured, some nodding, others still shaking with rage, but every single one of them hanging on to her words. Moore slumped in his chair, a man visibly smaller than when he had walked in. The atmosphere was electric, tense, and unrelenting. It felt less like a hearing and more like the opening act of a reckoning. And as the camera zoomed in on Jasmine, standing tall in the eye of the storm, her final words cut through the chamber with surgical precision, leaving no place to hide. "If your leader lies to your face, Will you stay silent or fight back? The roar of shame, shame, was still echoing when another figure rose from the crowd. Linda Miller, her voice trembling but her eyes burning with fury, clutched the microphone passed to her. She didn't waste a second. Even in rape cases, she demanded, her tone sharp as glass, you stand with no exceptions? The room held still, breaths caught midair. Moore leaned forward, gripping the table as if it might anchor him. He cleared his throat, his voice rising above the tension like a man daring the world to judge him. I'm 100% pro-life, he declared, every syllable pressed with stubborn certainty. The silence cracked open instantly. A woman near the front screamed, heartless. Another voice cut in, harsher, monster. Within seconds, the gallery was alive with raw outrage. Some were on their feet, pointing fingers, fists shaking, others clutching their chests as if the words had struck them physically. The chamber didn't just sound angry, it sounded wounded, a wound ripped open for the world to see. Moore tried to steady himself, but the fury was relentless. The air vibrated with it, every shout another blow to his crumbling composure. Then Jasmine Crockett rose, slow, deliberate, her presence commanding silence even before she spoke. She fixed her eyes on Moore, her voice low and resonant, carrying more weight than the crowd's thunder. You call that life, she said, her tone like a blade sliding from its sheath. She stepped forward, her voice rising with each word, each syllable sharper than the last. No, it's not life, it's cruelty, it's violence. And it is a betrayal of every woman in this nation. Gasps filled the air, followed by a fresh wave of applause and shouts of agreement. A teenage girl in the audience grabbed her mother's hand, whispering, she's speaking for us. The cameras capture every flicker of emotion, the rage, the tears, the trembling indignation, were people finally given voice. Moore opened his mouth to strike back, but nothing came. His lips quivered, his hand trembled against the desk. For the first time, he looked small, dwarfed not by Jasmine alone, but by the righteous fury she had unleashed. He shifted in his chair, searching the faces before him, but every eye glared with unflinching condemnation. Jasmine pressed on, her voice cutting through the tumult like thunder through storm clouds. Do you understand what you're saying, Mr. Moore? Do you understand what it means to force a survivor of rape to carry her trauma in her womb, to turn pain into punishment, to turn women into prisoners of violence? The crowd erupted again, not just in anger this time, but in grief, raw, unfiltered grief. Some shouted, some wept openly, and the sound blended into something primal, something undeniable. Moore slumped back, eyes darting for rescue, but none was coming. Jasmine leaned into the microphone, her final words deliberate, each one like a hammer strike. When leaders choose cruelty over compassion, when they deny humanity and call it morality, what kind of nation are we becoming? Derry Moore finally leaned toward the microphone, his voice shaking but still clinging to a facade of authority. Family values, he said, as if the words themselves could shield him. He repeated it again, louder this time, like a mantra meant to drown out the fury around him. This is about family values. The crowd didn't buy it. Murmurs rose like the growl of an approaching storm. A woman shouted from the back, whose family? Yours or ours? The tension was suffocating, pressing against every chest in the room. Jasmine Crockett didn't wait. She stepped forward, her eyes narrowing, her voice sharp and unrelenting. Values, she paused, the word dripping with disdain. Or shackles for women. The words detonated in the chamber. The audience gasped, some clapped, others rose to their feet. It wasn't just a rebuttal, it was an execution of his excuse, swift and merciless. Derry flinched, his hand recoiling from the microphone as if her words had physically burned him. The camera zoomed in, catching every detail, the glisten of sweat on his brow, the panic in his eyes, and then cutting across the room the face of a young woman in the gallery. Her cheeks were wet with tears, her shoulders trembling as she whispered, barely audible but caught by a hot mic, I was one of them. The crowd fell silent for a heartbeat, the weight of her words slicing through the chaos. Jasmine heard it. She turned, her expression softening for a split second before snapping back to steel. She pointed at Moore, her voice booming. Do you see? This isn't theory. These are real women, real lives, real pain. And you stand here, cloaking cruelty in the language of values. You don't protect families, you break them. Derry tried to interject, his voice cracking under pressure. "That's not fair." But the audience erupted, drowning him out. "Liar. Hypocrite. Shame." The sound rolled like thunder, relentless, unstoppable. Jasmine slammed her palm against the desk, the echo ricocheting through the hall. "You speak of family while ripping daughters from their futures, mothers from their choices, survivors from their dignity. You want control, not values, and the mask is off, Mr. Moore. Everyone sees it." The young woman in the gallery covered her mouth with her hands, sobbing openly now, as others reached out to comfort her. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashing, the moment immortalized. Moore's lips quivered, his eyes flicked desperately to his aides, but there was no script left to save him. The room had shifted, irreversibly, and Jasmine had seized it. She leaned forward, lowering her voice to a near whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "Tell me, Congressman, when your so-called values leave women in chains, what do you really stand for?" The chamber erupted again, not with chaos this time, but with something stronger, a collective verdict, damning and inescapable. And in that instant, it wasn't Barry Moore on trial, it was the very soul of America. The silence after Jasmine's last words didn't last long. It cracked open like glass under pressure, and suddenly the chamber exploded. "Resign, resign, resign." The chant shook the air, a tidal wave of fury crashing against the marble walls. The sound wasn't just loud, it was seismic, reverberating like an earthquake that no one in Washington could ignore. Barry Moore's eyes darted wildly. He scanned the crowd for a friendly face, a lifeline, anything that could steady him. But all he saw were jaws clenched with rage, fists raised in condemnation, and cameras zooming in on every twitch of his unraveling composure. He lifted the microphone, his voice thin, desperate. "Please let me finish. This is about respect, about order." His words drowned instantly, swallowed by the roar of voices demanding his fall. "Resign?" The word rolled over him again and again, each syllable a hammer pounding at the cracks in his crumbling mass. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the desk, trying to anchor himself against a tide he could no longer control. Sweat dripped down his temple, his face pale under the unforgiving lights. And then Jasmine leaned forward. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. She let the noise wash over her, waited until the crowd's fury became the backdrop to her precision strike. Her voice dropped low, calm, yet sharper than any scream. "Mr. Moore," she said, her words slicing through the chaos, "your silence is louder than your lies." The crowd hushed, not all at once, but in ripples, the way an audience falls quiet when they sense the climax of a performance. Dozens of eyes shifted from Moore to Jasmine, pulled toward her like iron to a magnet. The camera zoomed closer, catching her every movement, every flicker of fire in her expression. Moore froze. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His throat bobbed, his lips moved, but only silence answered. That silence filled the chamber, heavy, undeniable, damning. It was more powerful than any protest, more crushing than the chants that had shaken the room just moments before. His silence was confession. His silence was defeat. Jasmine didn't gloat, she didn't smile. She simply stood there, unflinching, her voice steady and final. "If you cannot defend the people, you do not deserve to lead them." A murmur swept through the crowd, low at first, then rising into a wave of approval, agreement, even awe. The chant changed, evolving from resign into a rhythm that felt more like prophecy. "Justice, justice, justice." The sound carried through the cameras, out of the chamber, into living rooms across America, igniting a fire far beyond those walls. Barry Moore sat back, shoulders slumped, eyes glassy. In that moment, he wasn't a congressman, he wasn't a leader. He was a man stripped bare, exposed before the nation, held captive not by chains but by truth. And Jasmine's words linger, heavier than the chants, echoing into every corner of the chamber, every home watching in silence. When justice is denied, will America crumble or rise stronger? The chants of justice, justice, were still ringing when another voice rose from the crowd, this time sharp, insistent, cutting through the nose like a bell. Jeff, a factory worker from Foley, stood tall in his faded work jacket, his voice roughened by years of labor. Why let Trump legislate taxes instead of Congress? He demanded, his question like a stone hurled straight at the dais. The chamber fell into a charged silence. All eyes shifted to Barry Moore, who adjusted his tie and tried to muster a smile that no longer came naturally. He leaned into the microphone, his voice heavy with rehearsed bravado. "Well," he began, dragging out the word, "because of the big, beautiful bill." He didn't get any further. The crowd cut him off instantly, a chorus of rage erupting like fire catching dry brush. "For the rich, not us," they shouted, the words hitting like punches, one after another, louder each time. "For Wall Street, not Main Street. For them, not us." The chant swelled, filling the chamber with a fury so raw it rattled the cameras on their tripods. Moore's smile faltered, his jaw tightening as his carefully crafted talking points dissolved under the weight of the people's voices. He tried again, his words rushed, panicked. No, you don't understand. It helps working families too." But the crowd roared back, drowning him out with laughter and contempt. And then Jasmine Crockett struck. She rose slowly, her eyes locked on Moore, her voice steady, measured, dripping with controlled fire. "Stop selling lies wrapped in golden paper," she declared, her tone slicing through the uproar like a blade. The room froze, every head turning to her, as if the air itself had shifted. She opened her folder, pulling out a sheet of figures and slamming it down on the desk. 83% of the benefits from your so-called big beautiful bill went to the top 1%. 83%, Mr. Moore. Meanwhile, families in Alabama saw crumbs. Farmers went bankrupt, workers lost homes, mothers skipped meals to pay bills, while your donors bought bigger yachts. Gasps erupted. A man in the gallery muttered, "She's got him." Another shouted, "Read the numbers, Moore, read them." Derry Moore's face blanched, his eyes flicking to the paper in her hand, then to the cameras broadcasting his humiliation nationwide. He reached for the microphone, but his hand trembled too visibly. His voice cracked when he tried to speak. That's not accurate." Jasmine leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying with surgical precision. "It's not just accurate, Congressman, it's your legacy. You sold out your people for power, and you dare call it beautiful? No, it's ugly, it's rotten. And tonight the mask comes off." The chamber erupted, a thunderclap of applause, shouts, and jeers. Moore sank lower in his chair, his face drenched in sweat, his reputation bleeding out under the lights. Reporters scribbled furiously, the cameras zoomed in closer, capturing the death rattle of a politician's credibility. And Jasmine, standing tall, didn't flinch, her voice the final strike. "When the poor are left with scraps and the rich feast on everything else, tell me what kind of justice is that?" The roar of outrage still echoed when Jasmine flipped open her folder with a snap that cracked like thunder. She held up a page, the text highlighted in red, her voice cutting through the nose like a knife. "Fact check, there is no removal of Social Security tax. None. Your statement, Mr. Moore, is false." The reaction was instant. The chamber erupted in a storm of applause and cheers, so loud the walls themselves seemed to tremble. People rose to their feet, clapping, whistling, pounding fists against railings. The sound wasn't just approval, it was vindication, the release of years of being ignored, dismissed, lied to. For once, the truth had a voice louder than power. Derry Moore's face drained of color, he gripped a microphone with hands that shook visibly under the glare of the cameras. His lips twitched as he forced out the words, his voice cracking. "Fake news." The crowd exploded in laughter, bitter and merciless. Shouts rang out, "We're not blind. Stop lying. You're finished." The words pelted him like stones, each one heavier than the last. His chest heaved, his tie clung crookily to his shirt as sweat poured down his temple. He looked less like a congressman now, and more like a man trapped with nowhere to run. But Jasmine didn't let him breathe. She stepped forward, slamming her hand down on the desk so hard the microphones popped. "Truth doesn't need your permission to exist." Her words landed like gunfire, silencing the laughter, commanding the room back under her control. She held up another sheet, waving it so the cameras could capture every figure. "Here are the numbers. Farmers in Alabama lost 37% of their income because of tariffs. Small businesses closed. Families paid more, while billionaires collected their windfalls from Trump's so-called tax cuts. And you had the audacity to stand here and tell these people they were helped." The crowd was electric, a storm ready to burst its banks. A man shouted from the gallery, "You're killing us, Barry." Another screamed, "My brother lost his farm." The voices collided, grief and fury mixing until the air itself felt combustible. Derry fumbled with his notes, papers scattering across the desk like feathers in a gale. He stuttered, You don't understand how these things." Jasmine's glare cut him down mid-sentence. "No, Mr. Moore, you don't understand. You don't understand the lives you've wrecked, the families you've abandoned, the people you swore to serve but instead betrayed. You hide behind numbers you twist, but the truth stands without you, and it will bury you." The chamber was on its feet now, cameras flashing, chest rising again, this time with a new edge. Truth. Truth, truth. The sound was deafening, irresistible, historic. And as Moore slumped lower in his chair, the lights glaring down on his humiliation, Jasmine delivered the final blow, her words ringing out like a gavel on the conscience of the nation. When leaders fabricate lies to disguise their failures, it is not just corruption, it is treason against the very people who trusted them. Derry Moore's voice broke before he even finished his sentence. What came out wasn't conviction anymore, it was stammering, disjointed fragments of words that barely held together. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again, but all that emerged was a pathetic jumble. You don't, it's not." The chamber pounced. "Liar." One voice thundered. "Shame." Another followed, then dozens, then hundreds, until the air was filled with a single chorus of contempt. "Liar. Shame. Liar. Shame." The chant rattled the rafters, a living storm hammering down on him. Every syllable felt like a stone hurled straight at the man behind the desk. Moore's hands shook as he fumbled with the scattered papers in front of him, but his fingers couldn't find order. The papers slipped, fluttered to the floor, trampled by the weight of reality. He looked to his aides, but they stood frozen, powerless to rescue him. The cameras captured it, all the sweat dripping down his jawline, the panic widening in his eyes, the collapse of a man who had walked in with swagger and now looked like prey cornered by his own people. And then came the light. One spotlight shifted, falling directly on Jasmine Crockett. It wasn't planned, but it felt ordained. She stood illuminated, every detail of her face carved sharp against the chaos. Her posture was calm, unyielding, like the one immovable pillar in a collapsing temple. The chants grew louder, but instead of joining them, she let the silence of her stillness speak. Finally, she stepped forward, her hand brushing against the folder of evidence that had already gutted Moore's defenses. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. Her words, cold and precise, slid across the chamber like steel. "The louder you stumble, the clearer the truth becomes. And tonight, the truth is this: you are unfit to serve the very people who trusted you." A wave of applause crashed against her words, rolling like thunder across the gallery. A woman in the front row rose to her feet, tears streaming down her face, shouting, "Finally! Someone speaks for us." The chant shifted, morphing, feeding on itself. Truth, truth, truth. The rhythm was deafening, irresistible, a verdict shouted not by judges but by the people themselves. Moore slumped in his chair, shoulders caving, eyes glassy as though the fight had already drained out of him. He gripped the edge of the desk with both hands, knuckles bone white, but it wasn't strength, it was desperation. Every camera, every reporter, every citizen watching at home could see it, the unraveling of a man whose empire of lies was crumbling in real time. Jasmine didn't let him breathe. She leaned into the microphone, her voice steady, her gaze fixed like a blade. "If lies built the empire, how many lies will it take before it falls?" The room erupted again, but this time it wasn't chaos, it was prophecy. The chamber was still reverberating with the chant of truth, truth. When a new voice cut through the storm, trembling with rage but steady in conviction. A man in the gallery, veins bulging in his neck, shouted above the din, "Citizens and non-citizens deserve due process." The crowd roared in agreement, their fists raised, their cries echoing through the marble hall like a rallying call to justice. Derry Moore's head snapped up, his face tightening into a scowl. He slammed his hand against the table, gripping the microphone with the last scraps of bravado he could muster. His words came out clipped, defiant, almost shouted, "No, they don't." The response was immediate, volcanic. The audience erupted into fury, a wave of indignation that shook the chamber. Voices collided, dozens screaming over each other, hurling the Constitution back at him. Fifth Amendment. One side roared, 14th, came from the other. Soon the chant unified, thunderous, merciless, 5th and 14th, 5th and 14th. Cameras zoomed in on Moore's face, his jaw trembling, his eyes darting. He tried to drown them out, repeating himself into the microphone like a broken record. They don't, they don't, they don't. But his words were lost in the storm, buried under the relentless cry of a people who knew their rights better than the man sworn to protect them. And then Jasmine rose, slowly, deliberately, every eye turning to her as if the room itself demanded she speak. She didn't need to shout. Her voice, calm but sharpened like a blade, sliced cleanly through the chaos. Even the Supreme Court disagrees with you, Mr. Moore. The room snapped quiet. The words rang out with the finality of a gavel. She held up a document, the pages marked with case law and rulings. For decades, our courts have ruled that due process applies to all persons under U.S. jurisdiction, not just citizens. Your claim isn't just ignorant, it's unconstitutional. Gasps rippled through the chamber. A young law student in the gallery clapped once, hard, before the entire crowd followed, the sound swelling into thunderous applause. Reporters scribbled furiously, capturing the exact moment a congressman had been dismantled with his own constitution. Moore's face twisted in panic. He lurched forward, spitting out the words he thought might save him. That's activist judges. That's not what America stands for. But his voice cracked under the weight of jeers. Liar. Tyrant. Enemy of the Constitution. The gallery howled. Jasmine didn't blink. She stepped closer, her voice steady. Devastating. America stands for justice. Justice that applies to every human being under its protection. When you deny due process, you deny America itself. And no oath of office gives you that right. The silence that followed was heavier than the shouting had been. Derry Moore's mouth opened, then shut, his eyes glassy, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. He was unraveling in real time, stripped not by partisan attacks, but by the very foundation of law he had sworn to uphold. And Jasmine's final words hit like a verdict, unanswerable, undeniable. If a congressman cannot defend the Constitution, then who is he defending, himself, or the tyranny he secretly serves? Derry Moore's composure finally shattered. His hands slammed onto the desk, his face twisted red with rage, spit catching the microphone as he jabbed a trembling finger across the chamber. His voice was no longer polished or political, it was raw, venomous. You're nothing but a cheap mouthpiece of Democrats. The words cut through the air like shrapnel. For the first time that night, the crowd fell silent. 3 long seconds passed, heavy and suffocating, as if the entire room inhaled at once and forgot how to breathe. Reporters froze mid-scribble, cameras zoomed tighter. Even the protesters in the gallery stood motionless, stunned by the naked venom in his attack. The insult hung in the air, toxic, undeniable. Moore's chest heaved as though he had finally said what he had always wanted to. He leaned back, his glare locked on Jasmine, expecting her to crumble, to flinch, to fight on his terms. But she didn't. She moved. Jasmine Crockett stepped forward, unhurried, every motion deliberate, like a blade being drawn. The crowd leaned with her, breathless, sensing something irreversible about to unfold. She stopped just a pace from the microphone, close enough that the camera caught the steel in her eyes. Her voice came low, calm, precise, deadlier than any shout. If speaking truth makes me cheap, then you're bankrupt, sir. The words detonated in the chamber. Gasps erupted, followed by a smattering of applause that swelled like a wave. People rose to their feet, clapping, shouting, pounding the railings. The silence broke into a storm of vindication. The insult flipped back on its author with surgical precision. Moore recoiled, his face blanching as though he had been struck. He scrambled for words, stuttering, You twist this is. But the gallery wouldn't let him. Bankrupt, bankrupt. They chanted, seizing Jasmine's words like a weapon, hurling it back at the man who had tried to belittle her. The chant grew louder, stronger, relentless, bankrupt, bankrupt. It echoed off the marble walls, every syllable a nail in the coffin of his credibility. Moore's jaw quivered, his eyes darting desperately for allies, but none came. His aides sat stiff, avoiding his gaze. The cameras zoomed in closer, recording every twitch, every tremor, every second of his collapse. Jasmine didn't gloat, she didn't smile. She stood steady in the storm she had unleashed, her eyes locked on Moore with a gaze that pierced deeper than any word. When the noise reached its peak, she leaned forward, her voice slicing through the chant like thunder. I don't answer to your insults, Mr. Moore. I answer to the people. And tonight, the people see you for what you are, a man bankrupt of truth, bankrupt of honor, bankrupt of the very values you pretend to defend. The chamber erupted, this time not in chaos, but in certainty. The verdict was clear. Moore was no longer debating, he was unraveling. And Jasmine's words landed like the strike of a gavel, final and damning. If all you have left is insult, then you've already lost the argument and the people, who once believed in you. The chant of bankrupt, bankrupt, still thundered through the chamber when Barrymore snapped. His chair screeched back as he lurched to his feet, his face pale, sweat pouring down like he'd been cornered in a cage. He tried to speak, tried to shout something over the roar, but the crowd had already turned on him with a verdict harsher than any gavel. From the back row, someone bellowed with cruel precision, "Bye, Felicia." The words ricocheted through the room, mocking, merciless. Laughter erupted, raw and cutting, joined quickly by others repeating it in rhythm, "Bye, Felicia. Bye, Felicia." The chant grew, swallowing the space, the humiliation coating every inch of Moore's crumbling figure. He lowered his head, shoulders hunched, eyes glued to the floor. He shuffled toward the exit as if the weight of a nation's scorn had bent his spine. His papers spilled from his arms, pages fluttering underfoot, trampled as meaningless as his words. The cameras followed him like vultures circling a dying beast, catching every step of his retreat. The gallery roared louder. Some booed, others laughed, others hurled insults that will live forever in headlines. Coward, fraud, traitor, the voices overlapped, a storm of contempt that no microphone could contain. Reporters shoved forward to catch the image, every lens locked on the slow collapse of a man who had once strutted into the chamber certain he was untouchable. The moment his hand touched the door, the chant shifted again, crueler, final, shame, shame, shame. It rattled the marble, vibrating in the air as though the very building itself rejected him. Barrymore disappeared through the door, swallowed by the shadows of the corridor, but the sound followed him like a curse, echoing long after his figure vanished from sight. The cameras lingered on the empty doorway for a heartbeat, then swiveled back to the chamber floor. Jasmine Crockett was still standing, straight-backed, unflinching, her eyes burning like fire under the glare of the lights. The crowd's fury softened as their gaze fell on her, their chants ebbing into silence, waiting for her to speak. She didn't hesitate, her voice was clear, deliberate, sharp enough to slice through the remnants of chaos. When liars flee, truth remains. The silence that followed was electric. It wasn't the silence of confusion or fear. It was the silence of recognition that something irreversible had just happened. That they had watched not just a congressman collapse, but a moment that would be replayed across every screen in America. Jasmine's words lingered in the air, heavy, unshakable, a challenge not just to Barrymore, but to every leader hiding behind lies. She glanced into the cameras, her gaze steady, daring the nation to turn away. What happens when a leader runs not just from questions, but from accountability? The door slammed behind Barrymore, but the echoes of his disgrace didn't stop at the chamber walls. Within minutes, the footage hit every network, every phone screen, every glowing television across America. Clips of him fleeing under the chant of shame, shame, looped endlessly, the sound becoming a drumbeat of humiliation sent to his image of defeat. On MSNBC, the screen split into panels, the hearing on one side, analysts on the other. Jake Sherman of Punchbowl News leaned forward, his voice clipped, surgical, and damning. Moore's claims were factually false, he said, eyes locked on the camera. On Social Security, on tariffs, on the so-called tax cuts, every single one collapsed under scrutiny tonight. This wasn't a debate, it was an exposure. The anchor nodded gravely, but the intensity only built. A commentator cut in, her tone sharp and unforgiving. "We've seen this before. Remember 2010, the backlash to healthcare reform? Big bills sparked big backlash, but tonight wasn't just protest, it was revolt. It wasn't orchestrated, it was organic, raw, undeniable." The screen flickered to footage from the chamber. Jasmine Crockett's words replay, in crisp sound bites. "Stop selling lies wrapped in golden paper. Truth doesn't need your permission to exist. When liars flee, truth remains." Each clip landed like a hammer, each phrase destined to become a headline, a hashtag, a rallying cry. Then, a cut to the crowd outside the courthouse, voices still bowling with fury. A man shouted into a reporter's microphone, "He lied to us for years tonight, we saw it with our own eyes." A woman held up her phone streaming Jasmine's speech live, tears streaking her face as she whispered, "Finally, someone stood up for us." CNN's chyron blared across the bottom of the screen. More humiliated than live hearing Crockett emerges as new voice of accountability. Fox scrambled to defend, but their panel fracture, one commentator muttering reluctantly, "She crushed him on the facts." There's no denying it. Social media exploded. Hashtags trended in minutes. Hashtag bankrupt Barry. Hashtag who pays the tariffs. Hashtag truth remains. Clips of Jasmine standing tall against the storm were remixed into TikToks, set to pounding bass lines, captions flashing. 41 seconds that shook Washington. Memes spread like wildfire, more fleeing with the caption "By Felicia" stamped across his back. Everywhere, one truth became impossible to ignore. The narrative had shifted. Barry Moore was no longer a congressman dodging questions. He was a symbol of collapse. Jasmine Crockett was no longer just a lawmaker. She was the storm. Back in the MSNBC studio, Jake Sherman leaned back, summing up the moment with words that felt less like commentary and more like prophecy. Every empire of lies thinks it can withstand truth. Until the first crack, tonight, that crack was televised, and the anchor, staring into the camera, left viewers with the question hanging heavy, daring them to answer. If this is the beginning of the collapse, how far will it go before the system itself is forced to change? The fallout spread like wildfire. What began as a single confrontation in a packed chamber now rippled across the nation, searing into every community that had felt the weight of broken promises. Farmers in Alabama spoke to local news crews, voices heavy with exhaustion. One man, his face lined by years of toil, held up the foreclosure notice on his farm. "Tariffs were supposed to punish China," he said, his voice cracking. "But it was me who lost everything." His image went viral, the pain etched in his words amplified by millions of shares. For women, the stakes got even deeper. Activists gathered outside courthouses and city halls, hoisting signs that read "Cruelty is not pro-life and our bodies, our rights." Survivors of sexual assault came forward in raw, unfiltered testimonies, streamed live on social media. Their stories echoed Jasmine's words from the chamber, turning her confrontation with Moore into something larger, a national reckoning on dignity, compassion, and the cost of political cruelty. And then came Social Security. Seniors filled town halls, waving their benefit checks at cameras, furious that Moore had lied so casually about protecting them. One woman shouted into a reporter's mic, he called it fake news. "My grocery bill isn't fake. My rent isn't fake. The only fake thing here is him." The clip went viral overnight, replayed again and again on morning shows, stoking outrage that crossed generational lines. But through the chaos, one figure towered above the noise. Jasmine Crockett was no longer just a member of Congress, she was being hailed as the warrior of truth. Editorials praised her courage. Late-night hosts replayed her takedowns with punchlines that drew cheers from audiences. College students wore t-shirts printed with her quotes, "Truth doesn't need your permission to exist." On Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook, hashtags surged. Hashtag who pays the tariffs, hashtag truth remains, hashtag bankrupt Barry. Memes spread like wildfire, more fleeing the chamber with captions like, "When you realize facts don't care about your lies." But it wasn't just mockery fueling the movement. Hashtags transformed into organizing tools, pulling together farmers, women's rights activists, unions, and students under a single banner: the demand for accountability. Cable networks replayed the hearing on loop, but the commentary shifted from Moore's humiliation to Jasmine's rise. Analysts called her moment the spark of a movement and compared it to the firestorm of 2010, when voices of anger transformed into waves of change. The difference now was that this wasn't just protest, it was personal. Every farmer who lost a field, every woman denied her right, every senior shortchanged on benefits saw themselves in Jasmine's battle. Her voice had become theirs, her defiance had become their rallying cry. And her victory, captured in high definition for the world to witness, was now rewriting the political map. The question was no longer whether Barry Moore would survive politically. The question was whether the entire system he represented could withstand the tide Jasmine had unleashed. And in living rooms across America, a chilling thought took root. If one truth could bring down a congressman, What would happen when millions demanded the rest? The roar of the chamber had long since faded, but in Jasmine Crockett's mind it still lingered like thunder echoing long after the storm has passed. Alone in her office, the fluorescent lights dimmed, she sat hunched over her desk, the night pressing heavily against the windows. Washington was quiet now, but silence only amplified the memory. She could still hear it, clear as if it were happening again. Shame, shame. The chant wasn't just against Barrymore, it was a cry for something greater, for a country on the edge, desperate for truth. Her hand trembled slightly. She reached for her leather-bound journal. She always carried it, a private place where the public storm could not intrude. She opened to a blank page, the pen hesitating before touching paper. Finally, she wrote the words that had been clawing at her chest all night. Justice is not loud, but it echoes. She stared at the sentence, her reflection faint in the glass of the window, and wondered how long the echo would last once the cameras moved on. She leaned back, eyes closed, letting the exhaustion crash over her. Images replayed like fragments of a film, Moore's trembling voice, the young woman crying in the gallery, the farmer holding his foreclosure notice, the relentless chants that shook the chamber. Jasmine knew this wasn't victory, it was only the opening salvo. For every Moore exposed, there were dozens waiting in the shadows, cloaked in the same lies, armed with the same cruelty. Her phone buzzed on the desk, lit up with messages, journalists requesting interviews, supporters flooding her inbox, colleagues offering cautious congratulations. But she ignored them all. She wasn't thinking about the headlines. She was thinking about the people who didn't have the privilege of turning off the TV and walking away. The mothers still working double shifts to pay for groceries. The women still silenced by lawmakers, the seniors staring at bills that never stopped piling up. Jasmine pressed the pen to paper again, the ink digging deeper this time. The fight doesn't end in the chamber. It lives in every kitchen, every paycheck, every courtroom where voices go unheard. She paused, then underlined it twice. A flicker of pain crossed her face because she knew what came next. With every confrontation, she was painting a target on her back. And the machine she was fighting had teeth. She stood, walking to the window, the Capitol dome glow in the distance, luminous against the black sky, a symbol both majestic and fragile. Her reflection overlapped with it, one woman staring down a system centuries old. She whispered to herself, almost inaudible, but certain, "I won't stop, not now, not ever." And as she closed her journal and shut off the lamp, the hook lingered not just for her, but for everyone watching, wondering how far she could carry the burden. When the cameras turn off, who carries the weight of truth? The fire that had ignited in Washington did not die, and the hearing ended, it spread. Across the country, the ripple of Jasmine's confrontation grew into waves of defiance. In California, Governor Gavin Newsom fired off his trademark all-caps tweets, needling Trump daily with brutal sarcasm that went viral within minutes. In Illinois, Governor J.B. Pritzker stood at a podium, his speech blistering, calling Trump's threats to deploy federal force un-American and branding his economic policies as nothing more than corporate theft. And in Maryland, Wes Moore mocked the former president as commander-in-chief of cowardice, his words clipped into TikTok loops that flooded every feed. For months, many believed the center of America had gone quiet, swallowed by polarization. But Jasmine's voice cracked something open, the chants of shame and truth. From that single chamber replayed on phones and in diners, on big screens in union halls, in whispered conversations at church gatherings. The so-called silent center was silent no more. They were angry, they were awake, and they were speaking in unison. Jasmine knew this wasn't just her fight, it was the start of a movement. She began reaching out to leaders across the map, stitching together what had been scattered. Newsom's firebrand trolling, Pritzker's blunt pragmatism, Wes Moore's mocking wit, different voices, different strategies, but one current binding them all: resistance. A resistance that no longer came only from the fringes, but from the very heart of America. On the streets, it was no longer small clusters of protesters. It was thousands, farmers marching with their foreclosure notices, women carrying signs marked with their own trauma, seniors holding their social security checks in the air like evidence. Their chants were not coordinated by a party machine, they rose organically, raw, unstoppable. Cable news ran split screens, Jasmine's fiery takedown on one side, left protests on the other, analysts calling it the spark of a second reckoning, A veteran on MSNBC said, "What millions were thinking. The silent center is not so silent anymore." And in that moment, America faced a new question, one larger than Barry Moore, larger even than Trump himself. When the center finally speaks, will it save democracy or prove it was already lost? The backlash was swift and merciless. Within days, Republican operatives unleashed a smear campaign designed to strip Jasmine of her rising power. Edited clips, crudely stitched together, flooded Facebook and YouTube. They painted her as radical, anti-family, un-American, twisting her words into grotesque caricatures. In one clip, her line "Truth doesn't need your permission to exist" was sliced mid-sentence, reframed as if she had mocked the very idea of American values. The videos spread like poison, racking up millions of views in conservative echo chambers. Online, the storm raged. Troll armies swarmed her feeds, hashtags like #CrockettChaos and #LiarJasmine pushed by coordinated bots until they trended. Comment sections turned into battlegrounds, some voices hurling venom, others rising in her defense. It wasn't just criticism, it was character assassination on a national stage. The goal was clear: silence her, bury her under nose, smother her momentum before it consumed them. But Jasmine refused to flinch. Late at night, alone in her office, she recorded a video on her phone, 2 minutes, unscripted, unpolished. No makeup, no studio lights, just her, leaning into the lens with eyes blazing. "I won't be silenced," she said, her voice low, resolute, carrying the weight of every fight that had brought her here. "Not by lies, not by fear, not by those who profit from corruption. My voice is mine, and it belongs to the people who still believe in truth." She hit upload, and the nation erupted. Within hours, her video went viral, 20 million views and climbing. It raced across TikTok, shared by college students, teachers, veterans, mothers. It was remixed into music videos, stitched with chants of truth, truth, truth. From the hearing, transformed into something bigger than a rebuttal, it became a declaration of defiance. Cable news anchors marveled at the phenomenon, calling it a masterstroke of authenticity. One commentator admitted, they tried to drown her, and instead, they made her unsinkable. Her words, unpolished and raw, carried more force than any attack it could withstand. And as hashtags flipped #ISTN with Jasmine trending above every smear, one truth became undeniable: every attack only made her stronger. The question was no longer if Jasmine could survive the storm, but how far the storm she embodied would reach. The attacks kept coming, but something else began to rise. Letters. Dozens at first, then hundreds, then thousands, flooding Jasmine's office in thick envelopes and handwritten scrawls. They came from every corner of America: farmhouses in Iowa, barrios in Texas, cramped apartments in Detroit. The ink was shaky, sometimes stained with tears, sometimes bold with fury, but each message carried the same heartbeat: gratitude. A farmer wrote with hands blistered from work, "They took my land, but you gave me a voice." A young Latina student scribbled on notebook paper, "You made me believe truth can still win." A retired veteran sent a photo of himself in uniform with a single line, "Thank you for defending the Constitution more than those who swore to protect it." But one letter stopped Jasmine cold. It was written in neat cursive on lined paper, folded carefully, sealed with tape. She opened it alone in her office late at night, the city light spilling across her desk. Her eyes scanned the words slowly, her throat tightening with every sentence. "I am a single mother of 2. For years, have felt invisible, working 3 jobs, skipping meals so my children wouldn't, paying bills I could never catch up on. When I saw you stand in that chamber, unshaken, I felt something I haven't in a long time. Hope. You gave me hope. Please don't stop." Jasmine set the letter down, her hands trembling. The silence of the office felt heavier than any roar of the crowd. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She pressed the paper to her chest, whispering into the empty room, "I won't stop, not now, not ever." The next morning, cameras captured her walking into Congress holding that very letter in her hand. She didn't wave it like a prop. She simply held it, quietly, a symbol that the fight wasn't about her, it was about millions unseen and unheard. And in that moment, something shifted. Reporters stopped asking if Jasmine could survive the storm. They began asking what the storm would become with her at the center of it. On social media, Her supporters turned the mother's words into a movement. Memes appeared with Jasmine's face next to the quote, "You gave me hope." Hashtag surged again. Hashtag hope with Jasmine. Hashtag truth remains spreading across TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, until they were more than trends. They were signals that the people weren't just watching. They were rallying. In her office, surrounded by stacks of letters and screens glowing with headlines, Jasmine knew the stakes had never been higher. The storm was rising, not fading. Every attack made her stronger, but every step forward brought greater risk. She understood the weight now wasn't just on her shoulders, it was shared with millions who had chosen to believe in her fight. And as she folded the mother's letter carefully back into its envelope, one thought lingered, not just for her, but for a nation bracing itself for what came next. When the storm rises higher, will one voice be enough to stand against it? The chamber was packed again, brighter, louder, hotter than ever. But this time, one chair at the witness table sat empty. Barry Moore had refused to appear. No excuses were needed. Everyone knew why. He had become the face of disgrace, the politician who fled under the weight of his own lies. His absence was louder than any speech he could have given. Reporters buzzed. Cameras swung to catch every angle of the empty chair. Commentators whispered about cowardice. The crowd sensed blood, and the tension in the air was electric, a silence straining to break. Then, Jasmine Crockett rose. She stood with her shoulders square, the light catching her face, the weight of the nation on her voice. She looked directly at the empty chair, then at the people gathered before her. "A leader who hides," she said, her words deliberate, unflinching, "is no leader at all." The chamber erupted, applause thundered across the hall, echoing against marble walls. Some stood, clapping furiously, others shouted "That's right," while fists pumped into the air. The sound rolled like a wave, cresting higher and higher, until it drowned the last shred of Moore's legacy. Jasmine raised her hand, and the room quieted, every eye fixed on her. Her voice cut through the air with a clarity that felt like prophecy. America cannot afford cowards in power. Not when farmers are broken, not when women are stripped of their rights, not when seniors are lied to about their futures. A leader who hides is worse than a liar, because silence in the face of injustice is betrayal. A gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by a murmur of agreement that built into cheers once more. Reporters scribbled like mad, their pens racing to keep pace with words already destined for front pages. On the live stream, comments poured in by the thousands. "Preach, Jasmine." "Finally, truth has a champion." Moore ran. She rose. Her eyes scanned the crowd, but her gaze seemed to peer straight into the lens, speaking to millions watching from their homes. She didn't just address the people in the room, she was addressing the entire country. Let this empty chair be a monument to cowardice. Let it remind us what happens when leaders serve themselves instead of their people. And let it fuel us not with despair, but with resolve. The applause rose again, deafening, relentless, the chamber shaking as if history itself was moving underfoot. Jasmine stood calm in the storm, her voice the steady center, her presence unyielding. And as the chants of "truth, truth, truth," roared once more, she delivered the line that froze the room in place, her words echoing like a verdict not just for Moore, but for the system he embodied. If America keeps letting its leaders run from the truth, then the question we must ask is this: who will be left to face it? The chamber trembled with applause, but Jasmine didn't ride the nose, she cut through it. She stepped closer to the microphone, her eyes locking on the cameras, her voice steady, unwavering. No president above the law, no community below protection. For a heartbeat, silence fell, the words hung in the air like a spark suspended in darkness. The crowd leaned forward, breath caught, the weight of history pressing against their chests. Then it hit, a roar of approval detonated in the room, cheers, whistles, stomps that made the marble quake. Some wept, clutching each other, others raised fists skyward, their voices breaking from the force of their own cries. The moment wasn't just political, it was primal. Farmers who had lost their land shouted in fury. Women who had been silenced screamed in defiance. Veterans stood tall, saluting, tears streaming down their cheeks. Every emotion, joy, grief, rage, hope collided into something larger, something unstoppable. Cameras swung wildly, capturing faces alight with fire, the sound so overwhelming that anchors on live television struggled to speak over it. The hearing was no longer just a confrontation, it had become a declaration, a line etched into the nation's conscience. Jasmine stood in the eye of it all, unflinching, her silhouette illuminated against the storm of voices. And as the chants of truth, 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 surged once more, her message lingered, not as rhetoric but as a challenge hurled straight into the heart of America. If justice can roar this loud inside one chamber, imagine how loud it will sound when an entire nation demands it. The doors of the chamber swung open, and Jasmine Crockett emerged into the night. The chaos of the hearing was behind her, but outside, a sea of people waited: farmers, mothers, veterans, students' faces lit by street lamps, eyes brimming with something Washington had long forgotten: hope. She didn't walk past them. She stopped, one by one, shaking hands, clasping shoulders, listening as if each word mattered. A farmer pressed her hand, whispering, "You spoke for us." A young woman hugged her tightly, tears wetting Jasmine's blazer. Cameras captured it all, but in that moment, it didn't feel staged. It felt real, as the chants swelled again. Truth. 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 The camera pulled back, framing Jasmine as a lone figure against the towering columns of Congress, her silhouette etched in defiance. The crowd's voices blended into narration, solemn, resonant, final: empires fall, but truth stands. The question is, will America fight for it? The screen cut to black. A single line appeared, stark white against the void, heavy with meaning. Justice belongs to the people. The silence after was deafening, deliberate, forcing every viewer to sit with the weight of what they had just witnessed. And then, the final hook appeared, a challenge not from Jasmine alone, but to every person watching at home. If your voice could topple lies, would you dare to use it? In every society, lies can build walls, but truth always finds the cracks. Jasmine's stand reminds us that courage is not the absence of fear, it is the decision to speak when silence is easier. Justice isn't abstract, it lives in the choices of ordinary people refusing to look away. And when one voice dares to rise, it gives strength to thousands more. The question is not whether truth matters, it's whether we will defend it when it's under attack. If you had the chance to speak against injustice, would you raise your voice or remain silent? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.